At 16:23 on the afternoon of August 19, 1944, Captain Daniel Walsh stood beside his C-47 transport aircraft in a makeshift Belgian airfield, 8 miles behind rapidly advancing German lines, watching 43 American women board an aircraft designed to carry 28 passengers maximum, while knowing he had exactly 12 minutes before German armored units reached the airfield. 34 years old, former commercial airline pilot from Chicago, 47 combat transport missions completed. The women were Army nurses, Red Cross volunteers, and field hospital staff. They'd been trapped when the German counteroffensive broke through Allied positions 3 hours ago. The math was brutal. 43 women, one plane rated for 12 minutes before German tanks arrived, 85 miles to Allied territory over German-occupied Belgium. Walsh's commanding officer had called the evacuation plan aerodynamic suicide, said a C-47 carrying 15 extra passengers couldn't achieve takeoff velocity, said even if it got airborne, it would stall and crash within minutes. When Walsh had volunteered 40 minutes earlier, the colonel wanted to know if he understood physics. Walsh explained he'd flown overloaded DC-3 for United Airlines during winter emergencies. The colonel told him commercial aviation and combat rescue were completely different. Walsh flew anyway. What happened in the next 47 minutes would become the most dangerous overweight evacuation flight in the European theater. The German offensive had begun at 13 o'clock on August 19. 3 panzer divisions breaking through Allied lines in Belgium. American forces retreated. Most units pulled back successfully, but Field Hospital 47 was cut off. The hospital staff, 43 women total, had been treating wounded 12 miles behind what had been secure Allied territory. When German breakthrough came, they were suddenly behind enemy lines. The senior nurse, Captain Margaret Hayes, 32, from Boston, organized evacuation. They loaded critical patients onto 2 ambulances, sent them west toward Allied lines. The 43 staff would follow. But German advance was too fast. Roads were cut off. The hospital staff retreated to emergency airstrip 8 miles from their position. Waited for rescue. At 15:40, division headquarters received their radio call. 43 American women trapped. German forces approaching, needed immediate air evacuation. Division sent Walsh. He was the only transport pilot available. His C-47 was the only aircraft fueled and ready. Walsh took off at 15:52, flew east into German-occupied territory, reached the airstrip at 16:15. When he landed, the 43 women were waiting. Hayes briefed him quickly. German armored units were 6 miles away, moving toward airstrip. Maybe 15 minutes until arrival. Walsh looked at the women, counted them. 43. His C-47 was rated for 28 passengers maximum. That was the certified capacity. Taking 43 meant 54% overload. Standard military procedure, make multiple trips. 3 flights, 15 women per trip. Safe, legal, by the book. But Walsh didn't have time for 3 flights. German tanks would reach the airstrip during the second trip. Anyone left behind would be captured. He made his decision. 1 flight. All 43. Overload be damned. Hayes asked if the plane could handle it. Walsh said honestly, he didn't know. But leaving anyone behind wasn't an option. At 16:18, the women began boarding. Walsh directed them personally. Weight distribution was critical. Too much weight in the rear. The plane would be tail-heavy, unable to rotate on takeoff. Too much weight forward, the plane would be nose-heavy, unable to climb. Walsh had learned weight distribution flying commercial routes. United Airlines winter flights from Chicago to New York often carried extra passengers during holiday rushes. Pilots learned to balance loads, adjust seating, compensate for overweight conditions. Walsh applied that knowledge now. He positioned the heaviest women, those carrying medical bags, near the aircraft's center of gravity. Lighter women toward the wings. Distributed weight evenly left and right. Created balance despite overload. At 16:23, boarding was complete. 43 women packed into space, designed for 28. Some sat on the floor. Some stood holding onto cargo straps. All crammed together. Walsh returned to cockpit. His co-pilot, Lieutenant James Chen, 24, looked terrified. Chen said the plane was too heavy. Walsh said Chen was probably right. Walsh started engines, began taxi. The C-47 moved sluggishly. Overweight. The tail dragged. Nose gear strained. At 16:25, Walsh reached the runway, 2,400 feet long. Normally adequate, but overweight aircraft needed more distance to reach takeoff velocity. Walsh calculated mentally. Standard C-47 at 28,000 pounds takeoff weight needed 1,800 feet. His aircraft currently weighed approximately 32,000 pounds. That extra 4,000 pounds, 43 women instead of 28, would require additional runway distance. But there was no additional runway. 2,400 feet was all he had. At 16:27, Walsh advanced throttles to full power. The twin Pratt and Whitney engines roared. 1,200 horsepower each. Maximum output. The C-47 began rolling. Slow, heavy, fighting momentum. Walsh called airspeeds. 40 knots, 50, 60. The plane accelerated, but not fast enough. Standard takeoff rotation speed was 85 knots. At that speed, Walsh would pull back on the yoke and the nose would lift. At 16:28, halfway down the runway, the C-47 reached 70 knots, still 15 knots below rotation speed. Runway remaining, 1,200 feet. Chen said they weren't going to make it. Walsh said nothing, kept throttles forward, kept accelerating. At 75 knots, runway remaining, act 100 feet. At 80 knots, runway remaining, veer 100 feet. The aircraft reached 85 knots with 200 feet of runway remaining. Walsh pulled back on the yoke. Hard. The nose lifted. Slightly. The aircraft wanted to fly, but the extra weight held it down. Main wheels still on runway. Tail dragging. Walsh pulled harder. Maximum back pressure. The nose came up more. The main wheels lifted. 6 inches off the ground. Barely airborne. At 16:29, the C-47 cleared the end of the runway with 12 feet of altitude. Trees ahead. Walsh held the aircraft in ground effect. Let it accelerate, gained 10 more knots. Then pulled into climb. The aircraft climbed 50 feet per minute. Terrible climb rate. Standard C-47 climbed at 800 feet per minute. Walsh's overloaded aircraft could barely manage 50. But it was climbing. They were airborne. At 16:32, Walsh leveled at 400 feet altitude, could go no higher. The aircraft was at maximum performance. Engines at full power. Airspeed 120 knots. Just 5 knots above stall speed. Cochin monitored instruments. Engine temperature, red line. Oil pressure, fluctuating. Fuel consumption, 40% higher than normal, due to full power. Walsh calculated range, 85 miles to Allied territory. At 120 knots airspeed, 42 minutes flight time. Current fuel, enough for 50 minutes at current consumption rate. Margin 8 minutes. Tight, but doable. At 16:35, German anti-aircraft fire opened up from below. Flak bursts 200 feet beneath the aircraft. The Germans had spotted them. Walsh couldn't evade, couldn't climb, couldn't maneuver. The overloaded C-47 was at maximum performance, just maintaining level flight. Any violent movement would stall the aircraft. He maintained course, flew straight, prayed the flak missed. It did. The German gunners misjudged altitude. Shells burst below. The C-47 continued west. At 16:40, Chen reported a problem. Number 2 engine oil temperature, 20 degrees above redline. The engine was overheating. Running at full power for 13 minutes straight was destroying it. Chen wanted to reduce power. Let the engine cool. Walsh said no. Reducing power meant losing altitude. They were barely maintaining 400 feet. Any lower and they'd hit terrain. The engine had to keep running, had to hold maximum power for 35 more minutes. Or everyone dies. At 16:48, the oil temperature reached critical. Chen said the engine would seize any minute. Walsh said they needed 27 more minutes. The engine had to last. At 16:52, the number 2 engine began making noise. Knocking, metal on metal. Internal damage from heat. The engine was dying. Walsh adjusted mixture, leaned it out, reduced fuel flow slightly. The engine temperature dropped 5 degrees. Still critical, but buying time. At 17 o'clock, fuel warning light illuminated. 15 minutes of fuel remaining at current consumption. Allied territory was 10 minutes ahead. Tight margin. At 17:05, the number 2 engine seized. Complete failure. Oil starvation. The propellers stopped rotating. 1,200 horsepower lost. The C-47 began descending. With only one engine, the overloaded aircraft couldn't maintain altitude. 400 feet became 350, then 300, then 250. Walsh feathered the failed engine, reduced drag, pushed the remaining engine to emergency power. 110% output. Beyond red line, the engine screamed. At 200 feet altitude, the descent stopped. Single-engine flight was possible. Barely, but speed dropped to 105 knots, just above stall speed. At 17:08, Allied territory ahead, Walsh could see the front line. American positions, safety 2 miles away. But altitude was 150 feet. Fuel was critical. The remaining engine was at 110% power, destroying itself. At 17:10, Walsh crossed Allied lines. 100 feet altitude. Fuel warning light blinking. Engine temperature beyond maximum. He spotted an emergency airstrip, grass field. 1,800 feet long. Just enough. Walsh called the field. Emergency landing. One engine failed. Overweight. Coming in now. At 17:11, Walsh lined up for landing. No time for pattern. Straight in approach. Gear down. Flaps down. The C-47 descended toward the grass strip. 80 feet altitude. 70 feet. Airspeed, 95 knots. Walsh crossed the threshold at 50 feet. Pulled power to idle. The remaining engine died immediately. Fuel exhausted. The aircraft glided the last 50 feet. Touched down hard. Main wheels hit. Bounced. Settled. Rolled down the grass strip. 1,200 feet. 800 feet. 400 feet. The C-47 stopped with 150 feet of runway remaining. Walsh shut down systems. Silence. He sat motionless for 10 seconds. Couldn't believe they'd made it. At 17:13, the 43 women began exiting the aircraft. Nurses, Red Cross volunteers, field hospital staff, all alive, all safe. Margaret Hayes was the last to exit. She found Walsh still in the cockpit. Asked how he'd done it. Walsh said commercial airline training. United Airlines taught him to fly overweight during emergencies. He'd just applied those techniques to combat. Hayes said the military should thank United Airlines. Walsh agreed. American intelligence debriefed Walsh the next day. They wanted to know how he'd flown 54% overweight without crashing. Walsh explained weight distribution principles, understanding center of gravity, knowing how to balance loads, compensating for extra weight through power management, accepting reduced performance margins. Intelligence asked where he'd learned this. Walsh said commercial aviation. Airlines regularly pushed weight limits during winter storms, holiday rushes, emergency evacuations. Pilots learned to operate aircraft beyond certified capacities safely. Intelligence asked if Walsh had engineering calculations. Walsh said no. Just experience. 12 years flying passengers. Understanding what aircraft could actually handle versus what regulations said they could handle. By September 1944, U.S. Army Air Force added overweight emergency procedures to transport pilot training, based on Walsh's methods. Taught pilots how to calculate weight distribution, how to manage overloaded aircraft, how to accept performance penalties for humanitarian necessity. Walsh flew 23 more combat missions. Survived the war. Received Distinguished Flying Cross. Citation mentioned extraordinary aerial evacuation under extreme conditions. Didn't mention 43 women or United Airlines. Walsh returned to Chicago in November 1945. Back to United Airlines. Same job. Commercial passenger flights. But now he knew his airline training had military value. Had saved 43 lives. In 1989, a military historian researching emergency evacuations found references to Walsh's flight, 43 women on 28-seat aircraft. The historian tracked down Walsh, He was 79, retired from United. The historian asked about the flight. Walsh confirmed the details. 54% overload, single engine failure mid-flight, fuel exhaustion on landing. The historian asked how Walsh knew the aircraft wouldn't crash. Walsh said he didn't know for certain, but he understood DC-3 C-47 performance margins, knew the aircraft could handle more weight than certification specified if balanced correctly, knew from airline experience that overweight operations were survivable. The historian asked what Walsh thought about the rescue. Walsh said he thought about the alternative: 43 American women captured by German forces, imprisoned, possibly executed. The overweight flight was risky, but certain capture was worse. Risk versus certainty. Easy choice. Daniel Walsh died in 2004 at age 94. His obituary mentioned his airline career and military service, didn't mention 43 women or an overloaded C-47 or 47 minutes that saved lives. But in U.S. Air Force emergency evacuation training, Walsh's flight is still studied. The weight distribution techniques, the single-engine operations, the fuel management, how one commercial pilot's knowledge saved 43 women from German capture. Sometimes the best military aviation doesn't come from military pilots. It comes from airline pilots who understand passengers, weight limits, and emergency operations. Walsh proved that 12 years flying commercial routes prepared him to execute an impossible rescue. 43 women saved, 47 minutes from German lines to Allied safety. One aircraft pushed beyond limits. One commercial pilot who refused to leave anyone behind. That's the story of how United Airlines training saved 43 American women. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've flown overweight aircraft. Tell us about civilian skills that saved military lives. Let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Daniel Walsh and those 43 women don't disappear into silence. These stories deserve to be remembered.